Average Joe travels the California Inscape. Season 5, Children of the Pumpkins. Episode 10, Pumpkin Apocalypse Now, Redux. Story by Penguin Pete. Written by Dodge Zelko. Puppet Mastery by Clyde Wren. And featuring the vocal stylings of This Is Signal, with Asher Ephraim as Spanky. A fella could get used to this, I thought, the chambered shotgun in my grasp. Sure, everyone's a pacifist till they get to lug one of these babies around. I sighted down the barrel and put the nearest golem squarely at the business end. A direct hit. Funny, because I hadn't pulled the trigger.
You'll have to be quicker than that, Joe.
Anne and I advanced into the melee, shoulder to shoulder, me wiping out everything to the left, her everything to the right. The ground was slick with pumpkin viscera. Suddenly, my foot slipped out from under me, and I wasted a shot into the air, back flopping onto the slimy concrete. Stars twinkled in my eyes. Anne, leaning over me, appeared 20 or 30 feet tall.
Joe, are you okay? Are you concussed? Why on earth did you wear your wingtips into battle? Good traction is vital at a time like this.
A thick, leafy vine wound itself around her waist. Seeing her get yanked off her feet shook me out of my stupor. I stood up, fumbled to load another shell. My palms tingled, and the gunmetal felt insubstantial, like a fading mirage. She'd been plucked away so swiftly that her Mary Janes were left behind on the pavement. A part of me wanted to pick one up and inspect the tread. However, I stayed focused on the matter at hand. Still, they couldn't be dramatically more practical than my wingtips. I struggled to get a bead on Anne. The golem flailed her around too erratically. Her shotgun was flung somewhere out of sight. She grabbed hold of the vine, cinching her, and began to reel herself in, closer and closer to the golem's body, as if she were climbing a rope. Once she was perched on its shoulder, she took some slack from the end of the vine and wound it around the golem's throat, pulling tight. Alarm entered the monster's eyes. It thrashed and teetered, colliding into other golems, crushing Buicks and Packards underfoot. Uh-oh. Oh, phew. Different Packard. Anne did not relent. Not until she'd throttled the beast and it collapsed with enough force to rattle a manhole cover from its socket. In the process, she took quite a tumble herself, but stood up immediately and brushed off her clothes.
My pumps! Where are my pumps?
I think I saw it land somewhere over there, by the hot dog cart. Said hot dog cart was engulfed in flames, solving a tertiary mystery for me as to what that delicious smell was hanging in the air.
Not the shotgun. My Mary Janes. My good Jacqueline pumps.
But by then she'd already spotted them and strapped them back on her feet. I was having a hard time forming adequate praise for the display of conquest I'd just seen, so instead I merely followed in her wake toward the hot dog cart, blasting every golem who so much as glanced our way. Imagine our surprise when we spotted a squat, serene little figure in a silver-buckled hat roasting 3 voluptuous wieners over the blaze on a makeshift skewer.
Spanky, what are you doing here?
He checked that he wasn't charring the meat, giving it a sniff test, and reinstated his kebab over the flames.
Are you kidding? Spanky wouldn't miss a show like this. He might have grandkids one day. They'll want to hear all about it. And what would Spanky say? That he got tipsy, heard it all play out on the local news? Well, the first part might have some merit, but Spanky'll be damned before he gives any man cause to call him a coward.
We tipped our heads back at the sound of Agent Cooper's voice bleating from a megaphone. He was still aboard the helicopter that had taken down the Great Pumpkin. That already felt like bygone glory days. The spiraling vessel issued black smoke from a fire in its tail rotor. Mayday, mayday, we have taken flak. We have taken flak and are forced to implement maneuver C Magenta 18254 Flagstaff, aka tactical evacuation. A host of puffy white parachutes deployed, falling like apple blossoms. Continuing the autumnal theme. Cooper and his cohorts touched down and immediately ran for cover. We thought it best to follow their example. That chopper was coming in hot. Just as Anne, Spanky, and I joined the agents in the ransacked lobby of a multiplex, the great wounded whirlybird plunged into its death throes, skidding down the boulevard like a mangled, fiery bulldozer. Golems were crushed, immolated, even pureed, as the main rotor blade kept on spinning. It sliced through the cladding of a skyscraper just as easily as human flesh. Glass, metal, and stone debris were unleashed in a shrapnel blizzard. This dramatic destruction was capped by the eruption of a massive fireball. I heard Spanky making peculiar sounds behind me, only to turn and find that all the excitement had caused him to choke, perhaps deservedly, on a morsel of stolen sausage.
Slant, Spanky. Maybe many years of heaven before the devil knows you're dead.
Happy for an excuse to slap him around friendly-like, I gave the leprechaun 5 or 6 thwacks on the back, until the treacherous bolus was disgorged.
Grandkids be damned. Who gives a whit what those wee lazy bastards think? Spanky should have stayed home.
Agent Cooper shrugged off his parachute pack and addressed us sternly. I don't know who the hell's responsible for all this, but having worked with you two before, he wagged a finger between Anne and me. Leads me to suspect your meddling had some part to play, at least in exacerbating this little fiasco. Meddling? I looked at Anne quizzically, not sure if I should be offended or if he had a point. Do we meddle? Are we meddlers? She ignored me, grinding her teeth.
Oh, that's your assessment, is it? Having dropped in on the scene with all the grace of the Hindenburg?
Too soon, Anne. Too soon.
Why don't you stick with what you're good at, Agent Cooper? Playing second fiddle and stealing all the glory once the smoke settles.
The lobby went silent. Tense.
Oh, boy.
Cooper drew himself up, beat red in the face. I'd never seen him in such disarray. His normally plasticized hair was a rumpled mess. His shirt front was missing 2 or 3 buttons. He had grime and soot on his face, a tear in the left knee of his slacks. Veins popped from his bald fists, his rigid neck. But when he opened his mouth to level Anne with a vicious rebuttal, something happened I truly did not expect. His eyes, already bulging, were literally expectorated from their orbital sockets. That is to say, for you laymen out there, they popped out. It seemed a sneaky vine had slithered in through the shattered multiplex door, squeezing around his abdomen like some incredibly constricting cummerbund. Blood crunched from his ears. It sounded like a blast of air from a tire nozzle. His eyeballs dangled, pitifully, knocking into one another, getting entwined. When the vine released him, he crumpled to the floor. His fellow agents belatedly began firing. I contributed a blast from my bounty hunter shotgun. Our volley decimated the assailant, but the damage was done. Cooper was dead. Unequivocally, irrevocably kaput. Who would break the news to Carter, I wondered? And would Carter even care? Spanky closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose.
Oh, poor Spanky needs an aspirin.
Poor Spanky needs a hell of a lot more than that. I gulped. It was one of those declarative gulps that signaled more danger was afoot. Our gunfire had drawn the attention of several golems, closing in on us from the street. Anne dropped to her knees beside our fallen federale, gliding her hands over his government-issued suit, muttering hopeless incantations. Look, Anne, I'm as gutted as the next guy, well, except maybe not Cooper, but we need to worry about the same thing happening to us. She ignored me. I would protect her the best I could. Thing was, I was fresh out of ammo. I flipped the weapon around so I was holding the barrel instead, still hot. The heavy oaken stock would make a serviceable club. I imagined each encroaching pumpkin head as a T-ball poised for decapitation. Anne carried on with more shamanistic trial and error, her focus completely monopolized. When the first golem lurched toward her, I stepped into the swing and launched its head clear across the street. I believe I even saw it breeze right through an open window. The agents had inserted fresh clips and were firing with precise abandon. Even Spanky, when one slippery golem snuck past our vanguard, took action and stabbed it through the head with his hot dog skewer.
That's for all me fallen mates in the Dublin doubloon debacle of yore. Declan, Finnegan, Seamus, ye be not forgotten, brothers.
Our ragtag counteroffensive had heart, all right. It had mettle. But it lacked numbers. I could only club so many golems to death, and when the agents ran out of bullets, I could hardly see them pistol-whipping the things. A little help would not go unappreciated here, Anne. You'll have a lot more bodies to mutter at soon enough. I don't think she hurt me, which is just as well. It might have led to a spat, and I'd hate for the last words we ever spoke to each other to be acrimonious. As I was pummeling another golem into a pile of goop, splattered with orange entrails from my fedora to my frictionless wingtips, I beheld a most welcome sight. Lucretia, aboard her faithful steed, Solomon, for 'twas his name, circled the 10 or so remaining golems, trailing a pink neon light from her wand. When the circle was closed and the enemy circumscribed in what resembled a huge glowing hula hoop, it triggered an interesting reaction. They devolved into madness, writhing around as if targeted by some powerful ultrasonic weapon. Their number one priority became putting themselves out of their misery, and so the golems cooperated in this by pairing off, taking hold of each other's shoulders, and ramming their heads together. So hard that their rinds cracked open. So hard that their their shells split. The agents and I, jubilant, relieved, watched a mass murder-suicide pact unfold until nothing remained within the neon hula hoop but a stinking mass of pulp and vines. I stepped past my poor, perseverant partner, who had manifested some magic eye spellbook and was rifling through its pages. I walked outside. The war appeared to have been won. At least the bounty hunters seemed to think so. A block away, I saw Roarin' Roy and his merry band of hellraisers loot a keg from a nearby saloon and tap into it right in the middle of the street. Lucretia dismounted her tiger. Must have been some nasty headache you gave those fellas.
Imagine you are a German shepherd.
Taken a bit aback, I obliged. And you know what? It didn't seem half bad. I would make a very fine German shepherd.
Imagine 1,000 sadistic lunatics blowing dog whistles in your ears. Trust me, Joe, you would want to crack open your head too.
Her eyes roved past me. Alarm entered her voice.
What has happened to Anne? Is she hurt?
Nah, she's just fretting over Agent Cooper, rest in peace. I tried telling her it's all for naught. He's a goner, sad to say. Unequivocally, irrevocably.
Put me down. What do you think you're doing?
I whirled around. I admit my mind went a little woozy. Of all the indigestible sights today, this one might have been the hardest to swallow. After all, I'd seen the man's eyes pop out of his head. I'd heard the blood spurt from his ears. Yet, here he was, walking upright and looking spry. And, not even all things considered, rather dashing. Agent Cooper. What's more, he was fit enough to carry Anne Darkside in his arms. My partner. Anne. A woman I never expected to see carried by anyone. Pick your jaw up off the ground, Joe. You're not rid of me yet. Spanky had evidently finished his hot dogs, and so had nothing to spit out in honor of this miraculous turn of events.
How in the blazes did that hopped-up copper untangle his papers and rise up like some Bakelite Lazarus?
Anne smiled. She brandished a lock of hair, the lock which Lucretia had given me, along with the sleepy-dosed Pez dispenser. I patted my pockets. Still Pez'd, but unlocked.
Snagged it off you in the scuffle, Joe. This religious relic was cut from the head of the Virgin Mary's sister-in-law, Promiscuous Patty. It resurrects people, but only once. And it worked just like it said it would in the brochure.
At her words, the lock of hair crumbled to gray ash and blew away in her palm. I sure hope the Illuminati weren't expecting Lucretia to return that little toy. Seemingly content with this explanation, Spanky abandoned his skewer and hummed a little tune as he shuffled toward Roy and his team. I, for one, suspected that this Deus Ex Insinulus might have consequences down the road, but let my reservations take the back seat for the time being, and surveyed the massacre's more immediate consequences. The bonfire of his demolished chopper blazed in the near distance. Blue and purple smoke, vaguely hallucinatory, swirled in the night sky. The city center was destroyed. Somewhere, I heard the unmistakable hornet whine of Chief Wankins throwing a fit. But I was euphoric, dizzy from such a sequence of close calls, and drunk on victory. Though that drunk wasn't quite cutting it. I hoofed up the block to get a dram from that keg, before that darn leprechaun drank his body weight.